Hey guys! Tonight we begin with the curious, bizarre, and frankly disturbing history of medieval alchemists. A profession where you're expected to work with substances that smell like the devil's personal laundry collection, believe that lead can somehow transform into gold if you just add enough prayers and mercury, and maintain the absolute certainty that you're on the verge of world changing discovery, right up until the moment something explodes and you lose an eyebrow, possibly permanently. Before we get comfortable, I want you to do something for me. Find yourself a position. Not just any position, but the one that feels like home to your body right now. Maybe it's on your back, with your head supported gently. Maybe it's on your side, with a pillow that knows your neck better than anyone else in your life. Whatever it is, settle there. Feel the weight of your body sinking into whatever's beneath you. You're not going anywhere tonight. The world is outside. You are here in this space. And we're going to travel back to the year 1247 to a basement laboratory somewhere in Prague, where a man who definitely does not have a PhD is about to make a terrible decision. Please like and subscribe our channel. Pause. Take a slow breath in. Count to 4. Hold it. And now, slowly let it out. That's right. The rhythm of breathing is what will follow tonight. In, hold, out. The same rhythm that medieval alchemists never quite mastered, because they were too busy holding their breath around toxic fumes to think about anything as practical as relaxation. The story of alchemy is a curious one. It's the story of intelligent, desperate, brilliant people who were absolutely convinced they were standing at the edge of something magnificent. And they were. They were standing at the edge of chemistry. Though they didn't know it, they were standing at the edge of modern medicine, toxicology, metallurgy, and 1,000 other fields that would eventually emerge from the wreckage of their laboratories. But what they thought they were doing was far more magical. They believed, not hoped, not wished, but genuinely, deeply believed that they could transform base metals into gold, that they could create the Philosopher's Stone, an object that would not only turn lead into gold, but also grant immortality, cure all diseases, and possibly make their landlord stop complaining about the chemical smells seeping into neighboring apartments. Pause. It's easy to mock them from where we sit, in our time, with our periodic table and our understanding of atomic structure, and our general agreement that the laws of physics probably shouldn't be bent just because we really, really want them to be. We look back at these medieval figures, with their robes stained with unknown substances, their hands scarred from chemical burns, their eyes watery from breathing in fumes that probably should have killed them decades before they actually died. And we smile in that particular way that means we're feeling superior and slightly grateful we weren't born in 1300. But here's the thing that makes this story curious, fascinating, and deeply strange. They were not stupid. Not even a little bit. In fact, many of the alchemists were among the most intelligent, educated people of their time. They read Latin. They understood mathematics. They had studied under monks who had preserved the scattered knowledge of the ancient world. They were operated within a framework that made absolute sense given what they knew and didn't know about how the world actually works. And in their attempt to accomplish the impossible, they ended up inventing the possible. They created new chemical processes, discovered new substances, and laid the groundwork for chemistry itself. This is a story of obsession, desperation, brilliant failures, and the weird intersection of science and wish-thinking that characterized the medieval world. It is a story of people who looked at the world and asked the wrong question in exactly the right way. And it is, most importantly, the story of people who worked in spaces that were dark, damp, filled with strange smells, and designed in a way that encouraged slow, repetitive, hypnotic work in the kind of environment where your brain gradually gives up trying to understand what's happening and simply drifts into a state of acceptance. Pause. So tonight, as you lie here warm and comfortable, far removed from the smell of heated mercury and the acrid sting of sulfuric acid, we're going to walk through these laboratories together. We're going to meet some of the people who worked in them. We're going to understand why they did what they did. And we're going to slowly, gently, drift into sleep while imagining the sound of liquids bubbling in glass vessels, the soft crackle of low flames, and the patient, repetitive work that fill the hours of people who are certain that the next experiment, the next combination, the next whisper incantation will be the one that changed everything. Before we go deeper, I want you to adjust your breathing again. Breathe in slowly through your nose. You can smell, if you imagine it just right, the faint earthiness of a medieval basement. Not unpleasant, just different from the air you're breathing now. The smell of old stone, of water that's been sitting in certain places for a very long time, of earth that hasn't seen sunlight. Breathe out slowly through your mouth. And again, in through the nose, out through the mouth. This is the breath of someone who has spent hours in a laboratory, patient, measured, accepting. Now, let me tell you about the man we're going to follow tonight. His name was Albertus, though that's not his real name, because historical records are frustratingly unclear about most alchemists, which actually makes the story better, because it means we can imagine him however we like. Albertus was 42 years old in the year 1247. He had a wife named Catherine, who had stopped asking him what he was doing in the basement about 5 years ago. He had 2 daughters, who were married off to merchants in other towns and who wrote letters that mentioned his work only with a peculiar mix of fear and shame. And he had an apprentice named Thomas, who was 17 years old and possessed that specific kind of determined naivete that only very young people can manage. Albertus had been working on alchemy for 23 years. Not constantly, you understand. He had taken breaks. He had worked other jobs. He had tried to be a normal person several times. But he always came back to the laboratory, pulled by a sense of certainty that was not based on evidence, and yet was somehow stronger than evidence. This certainty lived in his bones. It whispered to him during meals. It woke him at night. And on this particular night, as we begin our story, Albertus was convinced that he was close. Not close in the way he had been close 17 times before. This time was different. He could feel it. Pause. Listen to the silence of the basement as we descend. Listen to the way sound behaves differently in spaces underground. Your voice doesn't project the same way. Echoes come back slower. It's as if the earth itself is patient, willing to wait for sound to complete its journey before responding. This is the acoustic landscape that Albertus lived in. Not silence, exactly, but a particular quality of quiet that comes from being separated from the surface world by stone and earth. The reason I'm starting with Albertus is not because he's particularly famous. He's not. Most of history has forgotten him entirely. He left no great discoveries. His name appears in no textbooks. His experiments led nowhere. But he's real or real enough. People like him existed in hundreds of basements and workshops across Europe, and they lived in a state of perpetual obsession that makes for perfect sleep material because it is so deeply repetitive, so utterly hypnotic, and so completely removed from our modern understanding of how the world works. His story is the story of someone who wanted something impossible so badly that he was willing to poison himself slowly, spend a fortune he didn't have, risk his reputation, though there wasn't much to risk, and dedicate nearly a quarter century to a project that could not work. And yet, in the working, he learned things. He discovered that mercury could dissolve gold. He found that certain chemical reactions produce colors that seem to shift and change in the light. He created substances that had properties he didn't understand, which delighted him in a way that nothing else in his life ever did. And every night, when he climbed the stairs from his laboratory, his hands stained with things he couldn't quite wash off, his mind full of theories and half-formed ideas, his body exhausted in a way that only obsessive work can create, he was still certain that tomorrow might be the day. Tomorrow, something might change. Tomorrow, the philosopher's stone might emerge from one of his vessels, and everything would be different. Pause. This is a psychological state we're entering tonight. Not excitement. Not hope, exactly. But a kind of patient, repetitive certainty. The certainty of someone who has staked everything on something impossible and has therefore transcended worry entirely. Worry would be a luxury. Worry would require doubt. And doubt is something that Albertus no longer had access to. He had spent it all, used it up, exhausted it completely in the first few years. Now, all that remained was the work. So, let's go down those stairs together. Let's feel the temperature drop as we descend. Let's smell that particular smell that medieval basements have. Not rot, exactly, but the smell of deep earth and old water and the slow, patient work of time and moisture creating the conditions that make stone weep. Let's meet Thomas, the apprentice, who is carefully grinding something in a mortar with a repetitive motion that is making his shoulder ache, but which he performs anyway, because this is what apprentices do. They perform repetitive motions until those motions become meditative. And let's begin the story that will carry us into sleep. The story of Albertus and his 23 years of trying to turn lead into gold, and in doing so, accidentally stumbling towards something that would matter far more than he ever could have imagined. Pause. You wake. The room is dark, not the darkness of nighttime, but the gray darkness of a medieval morning. The kind of gray that exists before the sun has quite managed to convince the sky that today is actually happening. The air smells of cold ash from last night's fire in Old Stone. Somewhere, a church bell is tolling. Not the urgent tolling that means something is wrong, but the steady, patient tolling that announces the hour to people who have nowhere else to be. You think about the 50 experiments waiting for you today. Actually, not 50, 93. You've been counting. Each one is a variation on a theme you've been exploring for the last 7 months. This particular variation involves increasing the heat by the smallest increment possible, just enough that you can barely feel the difference in the air above the flame. The monks taught you that God is in the details, and you've come to believe that the Philosopher's Stone is also in the details, hiding somewhere in a gap between one temperature and another, waiting for you to find it. Pause. But first, there's the morning. Morning is important. Albertus learned this long ago. The morning is when the mind is clearest, when the eyes work best, when the body still has energy. Morning is for the important work. Afternoon is for the repetitive work. Evening is for the contemplative work, the sitting and thinking and wondering. And night is for sleep, though Albertus rarely makes it through a full night anymore. Somewhere around 2 hours before dawn, he gives up pretending he's sleeping and goes back downstairs. He sits up slowly. His back hurts. This is not new. His back has hurt every morning for at least the last 10 years. At first, he noticed it. Now he barely does. It is like noticing your own breathing. Possible if you think about it, but requiring conscious effort that doesn't seem worth the expenditure. He wears the pain like a coat, pulls it on without thinking, goes about his day. Catherine is already awake. He can hear her downstairs, moving quietly through the kitchen. She is preparing bread. This is what she does most mornings. She prepares bread, and he does not go downstairs to eat it with her, and she does not come upstairs to ask him to come downstairs. And this silence between them is now so old that it has its own texture. It is not angry silence. It is not sad silence. It is simply the sound of two people who once loved each other learning to live in the same house, while occupying completely different worlds. He dresses. His clothes are stained in ways that soap cannot quite address. There is a mark on his left sleeve that might be gold, or might be something that looked like gold once and has since oxidized into something else entirely. His fingers are discolored, not uniformly, but in patches and streaks, like a map of his work written in his own skin. The stains do not concern him. They are evidence. They are proof that he has been doing the work, continuing the work, not giving up on the work. Pause. He descends the stairs to the main floor. The kitchen is warm. Catherine has already managed to create heat, which is a great magic of women, the ability to make warmth appear in rooms that are fundamentally cold. She looks at him as he passes. She does not speak. There was a time when she looked at him with interest. Then there was a time when she looked at him with concern. Then anger. Then resignation. Now, her look is something else, a kind of patient anthropological interest, as if he is a creature she is studying from a distance, trying to understand the mechanics of what makes him function. He takes bread. He takes cheese. He does not take the small beer, because he's going to work. And the small beer makes him sleepy, and sleep is something he cannot afford right now. He is too close. He can feel it. The way you can feel someone standing behind you in a dark room, even though you cannot see them. This is how close he is to the Philosopher's Stone. Thomas is already down there, Catherine says. This is the first thing she has said to him all morning. It is not a question. It is not an invitation. It is a simple statement of fact. Thomas is already in the laboratory. Thomas has been there since before dawn. Thomas, who is 17 and who still has the stamina for enthusiasm, has beaten Albertus to the work. Albertus nods. He finishes the bread. He can taste the grain in it, the history of it. Somewhere, a wheat field was harvested. The grain was ground. The flour was mixed with water and yeast and salt. It was needed, repetitive, physical work, and shaped and left to rise slowly, and then baked in a hot oven until it transformed from raw dough into something edible. This is alchemy, too. He thinks sometimes the transformation of base things into nourishing things. But it is predictable alchemy, boring alchemy. Everyone knows how bread works. He descends further. There is another set of stairs, narrower, steeper, colder, that lead down to the basement. The smell changes as he descends. The smell of bread and cooking gives way to the smell of chemicals and flame and something underneath that he has never quite been able to identify. It is not a bad smell. It is not a good smell. It is simply the smell of his life's work. Pause. The laboratory comes into view as he reaches the bottom of the stairs. It is not a large space. It is not impressive. It is, to most people, either incomprehensible or laughable or some combination of both. But to Albertus, it is the most perfect space that has ever existed. There are furnaces, 3 of them. They are crude things made of clay and brick and hope, designed to hold heat at specific temperatures for specific amounts of time. The oldest furnace is 14 years old. It is held together partially by the knowledge of how to use it, partially by luck, and partially by Thomas's constant repairs with clay and mud and prayers. It still works. This is a miracle. Albertus knows it is a miracle because it has no right to work, and yet it does. There are vessels everywhere. Glass ones, expensive and precious, because glass doesn't react with most of the substances Albertus is working with. And because glass is beautiful, and beauty matters when you're trying to coax gold out of base metals, because beauty might be a sign that you're on the right path. There are ceramic ones, cheaper, more replaceable, but also more fragile. The breakage rate is high. Albertus has learned to accept this. Breakage is simply part of the process. Out of every 10 vessels, 2 or 3 will break before you finish using them. This is the mathematics of the work. There are metal instruments, tongs and stirrers and things that have no name, things that Albertus invented himself to serve purposes that only made sense in his own mind. There are scales for weighing, not very accurate, but accurate enough for his purposes. There are bottles, hundreds of them, filled with substances in various states of transformation. And there is Thomas, standing in front of the most active furnace, watching the color of the flame with the intensity of someone who believes that color contains information. His face is flushed from the heat. His hair is soaked with sweat. He is 17 years old, and he is beautiful in a way that only the young and the obsessed can be beautiful. Master, Thomas says, not taking his eyes off the flame. It's perfect this morning. Look at the orange. Look at the red at the base. I think the combustion rate is exactly what you wanted. Albertus steps closer. He looks at the flame. He does not understand what he is looking at. The color of a flame is determined by temperature and the content of the fuel, and 1,000 other variables that he does not fully understand. But he has learned to trust Thomas's eyes. Thomas sees things that Albertus has somehow missed, or perhaps his younger eyes simply process information differently. Either way, Thomas is often right. You arrived early, Albertus says. I couldn't sleep, Master. I keep thinking about what you said yesterday, about how the gold remembers what it was, even when it's been transformed. How, if we can somehow remind the lead what it's supposed to be, it might transform back, or transform forward. I'm not sure which, but the logic seems sound. It seems like it must work. Pause. Albertus smiles. This is what keeps him coming back. This is the terrible, beautiful thing about having an apprentice. It is the certainty of another person, borrowed and temporary, but nonetheless real. Thomas believes. Thomas has belief the way a well has water. It is endless and pure and inexplicable. The fire is good, Albertus agrees. Begin the heating for the morning distillation. I'll prepare the base metals. This is the ritual now. Every morning, it is the same, but in the sameness is comfort. In the repetition is meditation. In the refusal to vary is a kind of religious devotion. Albertus moves to the workbench. He opens a cabinet where the lead is stored. Lead is cheap. It is one of the few advantages of trying to turn base metals into gold. At least the base metal is inexpensive. He has spent enough money already without the base metal being precious. He removes a piece of lead. It is heavier than it looks. Lead is always heavier than it looks. This is one of the properties of lead that Albertus has come to appreciate. It has substance. It has weight. It has a kind of honest physical presence that feels appropriate for a metal that is supposedly made of failed gold. He places it on a scale. The weight reads correctly. 16 drams. This is important. Albertus keeps a journal of everything. Every weight is recorded. Every temperature is noted. Every variation is documented. Because if he succeeds, when he succeeds, he will need to know exactly what he did. He will need to be able to reproduce it. He will need to explain it to other alchemists so that they can verify it, so that they can repeat it, so that the knowledge does not die with him. This is a fantasy. This is the fantasy that keeps him going. The idea that what he is doing matters, that it will be important, that someone somewhere will care enough to verify his work and continue it. This fantasy is probably false. But false fantasies have kept better men alive for longer than true despairs. Thomas. Albertus says, add the mercury now. Slowly. We're not trying to shock the system. Pause. Thomas moves to a shelf. He retrieves a bottle of mercury. Quicksilver, as it was called in the old texts, and the old texts were right, because it moves like something alive, something silver and quick and dangerous. He brings it to the furnace. His hands are steady. This is good. Steady hands are important when you are working with mercury. Unsteady hands are how you end up losing teeth and losing mental function, and eventually dying from poisoning so slow that no one can quite trace it back to the mercury. He pours. Slowly. The mercury falls into the vessel above the flame. The heat causes it to begin vaporizing almost immediately, and the air above the furnace shimmers like heat rising from stone on a summer's day. The smell changes, becomes sharper, more insistent, more dangerous. It is the smell that has followed Albertus for 23 years. It is the smell of his work, encoded into the very air of the basement. Albertus watches. Thomas watches. They stand in silence, because there is nothing to say at this moment. The work is speaking. The work is always speaking, if you know how to listen. The language is the language of heat and color and transformation. It is a language that has no words, but which is nonetheless perfectly clear. This is morning in Albertus's basement. This is the beginning of the day. The world above is beginning. The sun is rising properly now. The streets are filling with people going about their business, buying and selling, working and resting, loving and fighting, all in the service of living normal lives in a normal world. But down here, separated by stone and earth and centuries of misunderstanding, the real work is beginning, or so Albertus believes, or so he has trained himself to believe. The distinction has become meaningless. The tools of alchemy are not so different from the tools of cooking, if you think about it in a particular way. They are tools of heat and transformation, tools that take one thing and make it into another thing. But the difference is in the intention. When you cook, you are trying to make something edible. When you practice alchemy, you are trying to make something impossible. And this difference in intention changes everything about how you interact with the tools. Albertus picks up a quill. Not a quill for writing, but a quill for stirring. It is one of his favorite tools. It is carved from the feather of a goose, and has been worn smooth by repetitive use. It works suspiciously well, which is what makes it trustworthy. He understands things that work suspiciously well. He trusts them in a way that you trust things that defy explanation. They have a quality of authenticity that feels almost spiritual. He dips the quill into the vessel. The liquid inside is the color of old copper. Not pure copper, but the color that copper becomes after it has been exposed to air for a long time. This is progress. He thinks. This is the liquid speaking. This is it saying, I am transforming. I am not what I was. The fact that it is transforming into something that looks like old copper instead of gold is not discouraging. All transformation is progress. All change is a step toward the final change. Pause. Stir. That is the meditation. That is the prayer. Stir and observe. Observe and record. Record and stir again. The repetition is hypnotic. Albertus has entered into a state that could be described as meditative, though he would not use that word. He would say he is thinking. He would say he is concentrating. But really, he is in a state beyond thought. Thought would be a distraction at this point. What he is doing is channeling. He is allowing the work to move through him. The quill works in slow circles. Dip, stir, observe. Dip, stir, observe. The rhythm becomes a soundtrack of the morning. Thomas is working at another furnace, performing a similar ritual with a different vessel, and the two rhythms work together in a kind of accidental harmony. They are not synchronized. Thomas works faster because he is younger and still possessed of a body that does not hurt in the morning. But the difference in rhythm creates a complex polyrhythm that fills the space with a kind of industrial music. Master, Thomas says, without looking up from his work, do you think the ancients knew something that we've forgotten? This is the question that Thomas asks most frequently. It is a question that every alchemist asks at some point, because the premise of alchemy is that the ancients knew how to transmute metals, and that this knowledge was lost, and that it is our responsibility to rediscover it. I think, Albertus says slowly, continuing to stir, that the ancients knew many things. I think knowledge was different then. Less organized, perhaps. More intuitive. They may have stumbled upon processes that we do not understand. Or they may have written about processes in ways that we are not wise enough to interpret correctly. Or they may have simply been lying, which is also possible. People like to tell stories about what they know. They like to make themselves sound more knowledgeable than they actually are. It is a fundamental human tendency. He pauses. Stir. Continue the motion. The copper-colored liquid has begun to develop small crystals on the sides of the vessel. These crystals are beautiful. They are not gold, but they are beautiful, and beauty is a kind of evidence. Beauty suggests that something real is happening. But the fact that we do not know how the ancients did it, if they did it, does not mean we cannot do it, he continues. We have something that the ancients did not have. We have failure. We have 23 years of my failures, and whatever years of failures came before me. We know what does not work. This is knowledge. It is not pleasant knowledge, but it is knowledge. Pause. The morning continues. Hours pass in what feels like moments. This is the strange property of obsessive work. Time becomes elastic. Hours compress into minutes. Days expand into years. Albertus once realized that he had spent an entire week in his laboratory, 7 full days, before he noticed that more than a few hours had passed. Catherine had sent Thomas upstairs to retrieve him, worried that he was dead. He was not dead. He was simply in a state where time had become irrelevant. Around midday, he takes a break. This is important. Even the obsessed must eat. He climbs the stairs back to the main floor. Catherine has prepared food again. There is bread and cheese and fruit. There is water. He sits at the table, not with Catherine, but at his own place, a few feet away, and he eats mechanically while thinking about the copper-colored liquid and the crystals and what it might mean if he increased the heat by exactly 1 additional increment. Catherine watches him eat. She does not speak. She has learned that speaking to Albertus when he is eating is pointless. He is not truly there. His body is in the kitchen, but his mind is 3 levels below, in the basement, continuing the work. He finishes. He drinks water. He returns to the basement. The afternoon is for repetitive work. This is the work that requires less attention, less concentration, less of the intellectual engagement that the morning demanded. This is a grinding and mixing and preparation work. It is the work of creating the conditions that will allow tomorrow's experiments to happen. Thomas has prepared a list of the day's tasks. Grind the sulfur, the old sulfur, the one that has been sitting in a sealed vessel for 8 months, absorbing the ambient energies of the laboratory, becoming something other than what it was. Grind it to a fine powder. This will take hours. This is repetitive work. This is meditative work. This is a kind of work that puts you into a state where your hands continue working while your mind slowly drifts towards sleep. Albertus takes the pestle in his hand. It is smooth from use. Everything in the laboratory is smooth from use. Where is a kind of polish in these spaces? Where is how things become perfect? He places the sulfur in the mortar. He begins to grind. The sound is different from the sound of grinding flour, which Albertus has heard Catherine do in the kitchen. It is harder, more resistant. The sulfur is a crystalline substance, and it does not want to break apart. It has a kind of obstinate solidity. Every impact of the pestle against the mortar requires force. Every rotation of the wrist generates heat in the joint, a small burning sensation that will become a dull ache by evening and a sharp pain by morning. Pause. But the grinding continues. This is what apprenticeship is. It is this. It is taking a tool and performing a repetitive action with it until the action becomes part of you, until you can do it without thinking, until the distinction between the tool and your hand becomes meaningless. By the time Thomas is Albertus's age, if he stays in this work, his wrists will look like something other than human wrists. They will be stronger. The bone will be denser. The tendons will have developed in specific ways to accommodate the specific motions that the work demands. This is the hidden cost of mastery. It is not just the knowledge. It is not just the experience. It is the physical toll. It is the way that doing something obsessively changes your body in ways that cannot be undone. After you have ground sulfur for 23 years, you cannot be someone who has not ground sulfur for 23 years. Your hands remember. Your wrists remember. Your shoulders remember. The grinding continues. Minutes pass. The sulfur becomes powder. But it is not fine powder yet. Albertus continues. The powder becomes finer. The sensation in his wrist becomes more acute. He is aware of pain, but the pain is below the level of concern. The pain is simply data. The pain is information. The pain is what it means to be alive and doing work. Master, Thomas says from somewhere in a laboratory. His voice seemed to come from very far away, though he is probably only 10 feet distant. The fire is ready for the second distillation. Whenever you finish with the sulfur, Albertus becomes aware of his body again. He looks down at his hands. They are covered in fine sulfur powder. The powder is pale yellow, almost luminescent in the dim light of the basement. It is beautiful. It is not what it was, and it is not yet what it will be, but it is beautiful in the state of transformation. He sets down the pestle. He looks at the powder and understands something, not clearly, not in words, but in a way that bypasses language entirely, about the nature of transformation. All transformation is a state of not knowing. All transformation happens in this space between what something was and what it will become. The philosopher's stone, if it exists, if it can be created, would be the moment where everything is transformed, where the gap closes, where lead becomes gold. But the gap is eternal. The gap is where all the interesting work happens. He takes a mortar and pours the powder into a vessel. He carries it to furnace. The heat is waiting. Thomas has prepared everything. The apprentice is becoming the assistant now. Thomas is learning the rhythm well enough to anticipate the needs of the master. The powder goes into the heat. The color begins to change almost immediately. The pale yellow becomes darker. The color progression is beautiful. Yellow to amber to orange to red. It is moving along the color spectrum the way certain things do when exposed to sufficient heat. It is a language of transformation written in light. Pause. They watch. There is nothing else to do now but watch and wait. This is the moment where alchemy becomes something closer to prayer. The work has been done. The preparation has been completed. Now comes the revelation. Now comes the waiting to see if anything interesting will happen. Albertus thinks about the monks who taught him the basics of chemistry, and they did teach chemistry, though they called it alchemy, and though they understood it through a lens of religious transformation that made the scientific transformation seem almost incidental. They told him that the work is a mirror. The work reflects back what you put into it. If you put in patience, you get patience back. If you put in attention, you get secrets. If you put in love, you get transformation. He thought they were speaking in metaphors. Now, after 23 years, he understands that they might have been speaking literally. Love might be a real substance. Attention might be a real force. The possibility that the ancients understood something about the nature of consciousness and reality that modernity has lost is not something Albertus can dismiss. He has seen too many strange things in his laboratory. He has created too many substances that behave in ways that should not be possible. The sulfur in the heat is beginning to release vapors. The smell intensifies. It is not a good smell. It is not a pleasant smell. But it is a real smell, and reality, in Albertus's philosophy, is worth something, even if that something is unpleasant. The color is changing again, Thomas observes. Look, It's becoming more crimson. Do you think that means? It means the heat is doing what it's supposed to do, Albertus interrupts, not unkindly. Whether that what it's supposed to do is what we wanted to do remains to be seen. But something is happening. Something is always happening. The question is whether what is happening is a step toward gold or a step away from it. This is the eternal uncertainty. This is what keeps Albertus up at night. This is why he cannot sleep properly anymore. He cannot distinguish between progress and failure because the visible phenomena of progress and failure are so similar. A substance might be transforming toward gold, or it might be decomposing toward waste. The colors might be evidence of the path forward, or they might be red herrings. Literally, they might be red, but they might not be misleading because of it. The afternoon stretches into evening. The furnaces continue their work. The laboratory fills with heat and the smell of transformation. Albertus and Thomas continue their vigilance, watching the colors change, recording the observations, waiting for the moment when something unexpected might happen, when the accidental discovery might occur, when the work might yield something that cannot be explained. This is mastery in Albertus's understanding, not the confidence that you know what you are doing, not the security of predictable outcomes, but the ability to continue working in the face of profound uncertainty, the ability to maintain faith in a process that is yet to yield results, the ability to find meaning in the repetitive action itself rather than in any promised conclusion. And as evening falls and the light in the basement becomes dependent entirely on the light from the furnaces, Albertus and Thomas continue the work. Two figures in a space that is not quite a medieval world and not quite of any other world, working in a way that is not quite science and not quite religion, pursuing a goal that is not quite impossible and not quite certain, in a state of mind that is not quite hope and not quite despair. Pause. Let us consider, for a moment, what Albertus has created in his laboratory. We are talking about a specific moment now. Let's say 3 months into the current series of experiments, when Albertus believes he has made a discovery that might matter. The substance in question is yellow. It is metallic in sheen. It catches the light in a way that reminds Albertus of gold. Though he knows enough about light and reflection to understand that many substances might catch light in a way that reminds someone of gold if that someone is sufficiently motivated to see gold in everything. But still it is yellow. It is metallic. It weighs more than the base metals that went into the process that created it, which should not be possible according to the laws of matter, but which nonetheless appears to have happened. He brings it to his friend Marcus. Marcus is not an alchemist, but he is a metalsmith, and a metalsmith understands metal in ways that other people do not. Marcus has a workshop across town, a place filled with the sound of hammering and the smell of hot metal and the constant physical exertion of someone who works with his hands. Albertus enters the workshop without announcement. This is acceptable, as they have known each other for 17 years and have moved beyond the formality of announcements. Marcus is working on something, a cup perhaps, or a decoration, something that requires the constant application of heat and shaping. Marcus, Albertus says, and he holds out the yellow substance. Marcus stops working. He looks at what Albertus is offering. He does not touch it immediately. He looks at Albertus instead, studying his face, reading something in the expression there that goes beyond the object itself. This is another one, Marcus says. Not a question. This one is different. Albertus says. Marcus takes it. He is accustomed to the weight of metals, so his reaction is subtle, but Albertus sees it. There's a moment of surprise, a moment where Marcus's hand dips lower than expected before adjusting to the actual weight. The substance is heavier than it should be. Marcus holds it up to the light. The color is not quite consistent. There are variations, gradations of yellow, shifting into what might be described as orange or what might be described as just a shadowing effect. It is impossible to tell. Pause. This could be, Marcus says slowly, gold with some impurity. Or it could be a copper-gold alloy. Or it could be something else entirely that happens to be yellow and metallic. Where did it come from? From the laboratory. From the heating process I've been working with for the last 3 months. Marcus sets it down on his workbench. He tests it. He presses on it with a tool. The substance resists the pressure. It is hard. It is not easily deformed. This is either very promising or completely meaningless. Albertus has learned that these are often the same thing. I would need to test it properly, Marcus says. I would need to assay it, which would destroy it. Are you prepared for that possibility? This is a question that separates serious alchemists from desperate ones. An alchemist who is serious, who truly believes in his work, should be willing to have his creations tested, should be willing to have them proven true or false. But a desperate alchemist, an alchemist who is emotionally invested in the outcome, might not be willing to surrender the substance to testing, because testing might prove that it is not gold, and that proof will be a kind of death. Albertus stands in the workshop, looking at the yellow substance on the bench, and he tries to examine his own emotional state. He cannot tell if he is desperate or serious. He cannot tell if he is in love with the work or addicted to work, or if there is even a meaningful distinction between these two states. Yes, he says finally. Test it. Marcus nods. It will take time. I'll need to use mercury and acid and several other processes. If you leave it with me, I can have an answer for you in a week. A week. Albertus has waited for longer than a week before. He has waited for months. He has waited for years. But a week seems both impossibly long and encouragingly short. A week is enough time to hope. A week is enough time to imagine that something might change. He leaves the substance with Marcus. He returns to his laboratory. Pause. The week passes in a state of suspended animation. Albertus works, but his work is different. His movements are quicker. His attention is divided. Part of him is in the basement, continuing the experiments, continuing the repetitive work. But part of him is across town, in Marcus's workshop, watching as Marcus prepares to test the substance, watching as Marcus uses chemicals and heat to determine whether the substance is truly what Albertus believes it to be. He returns to Marcus on the 8th day. It is not gold. Marcus says immediately, and Albertus feels something in his chest collapse, feels a hope that he had been cultivating all week crumble like an old parchment. But it is interesting. The but is important. The but is where hope lives. It is a copper lead alloy with some admixture of something else, something that I cannot identify. It has properties that are unusual. The density is higher than it should be for this composition. And there are metallic properties that do not conform to what I know about copper lead alloys. It is possible that you have created something new. Something new, not gold, but new. In the hierarchy of success, new is not as high as gold, but it is higher than failure or worthless. Something new is something that did not exist before. Something new is a claim to having changed the world, even if only by a tiny amount. What should I do? Albertus asks. Continue. Marcus says, whatever process created this, continue it. Refine it. You may be on the edge of something. I cannot tell you it is gold, because it is not. But I can tell you it is not nothing. Pause. Albertus returns to his laboratory with renewed energy. He has not found gold, but he has found evidence that something is working. The process is doing something. It is creating substances that should not exist. And if substances that should not exist could be created, then perhaps gold, which should not exist in the composition of these materials, might be creatable as well. He throws himself back into the work with an intensity that surprises even Thomas. He repeats the process. He documents everything even more carefully. He begins to map the variables: temperature, duration, exact materials used, order combination, humidity in the laboratory, phase of the moon, prayer spoken or not spoken. This is the moment where alchemy becomes something that looks like science. This is the moment where empirical method emerges from ritual. It is happening accidentally without intention, but it is happening. Albertus is learning, without quite realizing it, that if you want to understand how something works, you have to control the variables. You have to change one thing, and then one other thing, and observe what effect each change has. This is the beginning of the scientific method, though Albertus would not call it that. He creates 8 more iterations of the process. 7 of them fail to produce the interesting copper lead alloy, but the 8th one does. The 8th one produces something that Marcus declares is even more interesting than the first iteration, denser, more metallic, with properties that are even more anomalous. Word begins to spread. There's a merchant in Prague, a man named Dmitri, who has connections to other alchemists in other cities. He hears about the substance that Albertus has created. He comes to the laboratory. Dmitri is successful in the ordinary sense. He trades in spices and fabrics and things that people want. He has money. He has resources. He is not an alchemist, but he is interested in alchemy because alchemy represents a possibility of abundance, of transformation, of creating value from nothing, or at least from cheap materials. Every merchant understands a desire to buy something for a small amount and sell it for a larger amount. Alchemy is the ultimate expression of this desire. He looks at the substance in Albertus's laboratory. He holds it. He tests it much as Marcus did, though with less expertise and more wonder. How much can you produce? Dmitri asks. I do not know, Albertus says. I have made 9 of them, using the same process with variations. I can make more, certainly, but I would need resources. The materials are not expensive, but the time is extensive, and I would need an assistant who understands the work. I will finance you, Dmitri says. I will provide you with materials, with assistance, with whatever you need. I will buy every substance that you create. In return, you will share the process with me, and I will have the right to continue the work if I choose to. This is how alchemy becomes business. This is the moment where something that was purely personal obsession becomes something with economic dimensions. Albertus considers. The logical part of his mind, the part that still remembers he is supposed to be a sensible person, tells him to be careful. This Dmitri is not a fool. He would not offer support unless he believed there was money to be made. And if he believed there was money to be made, then either he understands something about the value of the substances that Albertus does not understand, or he is deluded. But the part of Albertus that has lived in the basement for 23 years, the part that has accepted obsession as a fundamental truth about the way he will live until he dies, says yes. Yes, this is what you want. Yes, this is what you need. Yes, this will allow you to continue the work without the constant burden of finding materials and financing your own failure. I will do it. Albertus says, pause. This decision will change the trajectory of his life in ways he cannot yet imagine. Within 6 months, he will have a larger laboratory. Within a year, he will have 2 assistants beyond Thomas. Within 2 years, the substances he creates will be circulating among alchemists in 3 different cities, and there will be a network of people working to understand the process, to refine it, to determine what exactly it is that creates these anomalous substances. Some of them will succeed in replicating the results. Others will fail. A few will explode in the attempt. But the work will continue. The work will spread. The work will become real in a way that it was not when it was just Albertus alone in his basement, grinding sulfur and hoping. Is this success? Has Albertus achieved his goal? He has not created gold. He has not created the philosopher's stone. But he has created something new. He has changed the world, in however small a way. He has enabled others to continue the work. He has passed forward something that did not exist before. And most importantly for him, he has validation. He has proof that something in his work is not completely imaginary. The substances are real. They exist. They cannot be explained by conventional wisdom. And that reality, that existence, that inexplicability, is enough. He continues the work with Dimitri's support. He continues the work with Thomas and his new assistants. He continues the work with a renewed sense of purpose. The philosopher's stone has not been created. Gold has not been made from lead. But something has been made, and that something matters. And as he sleeps now, because even the obsessed must sleep, and Albertus has learned to sleep better since the work has gained external validation, he dreams not gold but the process, of the steps that lead from one state to another, of the transformation that happens when you are willing to wait long enough and work hard enough and believe strongly enough. Let me tell you about Thomas's first day in the laboratory. This was 17 years before the moment we've been describing. Thomas was very young then, not quite 0 years old, but very close. He was a boy who had been sent to the laboratory by his father, a wool merchant who believed that alchemy might be a better investment than his current business, and who thought that his son might learn something useful if he apprenticed with Albertus. Thomas did not want to be there. He wanted to be many other places. He wanted to be playing in the street with the other boys. He wanted to be helping his father with the wool business, learning the trade that would allow him to continue the family legacy. He wanted to be anywhere except in a dark basement that smelled like something had died and was slowly being preserved in chemicals. But here's the thing about apprenticeship. It does not care about your preferences. Apprenticeship simply begins with or without your consent. Albertus was 40 years younger then. Wait, no, that's not right. Albertus was 57 years old when Thomas arrived. Thomas was 12. This matters because Albertus was old enough to be tired of teaching, but young enough that he could still produce the physical work of the laboratory. Thomas was young enough to learn quickly, but old enough to understand that some things are unpleasant and must be endured. Today, Albertus said on that first day, "You will learn to grind. Grinding is the foundation of all work. Everything that happens in this laboratory requires material that has been properly ground. So we will begin with grinding." He showed Thomas the mortar and pestle. He showed him how to hold it. He showed him the proper motion. Not random circular motions, but specific motions that put maximum pressure on the material while minimizing the wear on the tool itself. It is an art, grinding. Albertus had not realized this until he'd been doing it for years, but it is an art. Pause. For the first hour, Thomas ground salt. Just salt. Nothing exotic. Nothing dangerous. Just salt crystals being reduced to powder. The motion was simple, but not easy. By the time the hour was complete, Thomas's wrist hurt. His shoulder hurt. His arm felt like it might fall off and continue grinding without him. Good. Albertus said, examining the results. The powder is acceptable. Tomorrow you will do this again. Tomorrow, Thomas did grind again. And the day after that, and the day after that. For 3 months, Thomas ground salt. He ground it as a punishment. He ground it as training. He ground it as a repetitive foundation that would allow him to become competent at this work. Why salt? Why not something more interesting? Because salt is cheap. Because salt is not dangerous. Because grinding salt teaches you the motion without risking your life in the learning. Because the boring, repetitive work is the work that builds the skill that matters most. After 3 months of salt, Albertus introduced herbs. Dried herbs. Sage and rosemary and other plants that had been dried and preserved. These ground more easily than salt, but required more attention. The different plants ground at different rates. Different pressures were required. Different techniques were effective or ineffective depending on the material itself. Thomas learned this slowly. He learned it not through instruction but through experience. He would grind too hard, and the herbs would become powder so fine that it would float away. He would grind too softly, and the herbs would remain in large pieces. Eventually, through repetition, through failure, through the slow accumulation of experience, he would find the middle path. This is how you learn. Albertus told him after 6 months, not through understanding, but through doing. You will do this 10,000 times before you truly understand it. And even then, you will still be learning. Pause. Thomas did not enjoy this. He resented the repetition. He resented the pain in his wrist. He resented the smell of the laboratory and the coldness of the basement, and the fact that he was not out in the world doing something that mattered. But something happened. Somewhere around the 9-month mark, something shifted. Thomas realized that he was good at this. His hands had learned something that his mind could not quite access. His body knew how to grind. His muscle memory had been developed through repetition to the point where the motion had become almost automatic. He could grind while thinking about other things. He could grind while talking. He could grind in a state of semi-consciousness, and the result would still be acceptable. At this point, something changed in his relationship with the work. The resentment did not disappear entirely, but it became secondary to something else. There was a kind of satisfaction in doing something well. There was a kind of pride in being competent at a task. There was a kind of belonging in the laboratory that he had not expected to find. You are ready, Albertus told him after a year, to begin to learn the actual work. The actual work was different from grinding. The actual work involved heat and materials and processes that could go wrong in ways that could burn you or poison you, or damage your hands in permanent ways. The actual work was the work that required attention and intention, and the kind of focus that only comes from years of repetitive preparation. Albertus taught him slowly. He showed him how to judge temperature by color of flame. He showed him how to measure materials by weight and volume. He showed him how to make notes of everything, because the work only matters if the work can be repeated, and the work can only be repeated if every step is documented. Thomas made mistakes, serious mistakes. He overheated a mixture and it exploded, coating him in a substance that burned his skin and left marks for 3 months. He mixed the wrong materials in the wrong order and created a gas that made him sick for a week. He spilled a precious substance, and Albertus did not speak to him for 2 days, which somehow was worse than shouting would have been. But he continued, and through the continuing, through the failure, through the slow accumulation of knowledge that comes from doing something obsessively, Thomas became competent. Not brilliant, not the kind of genius that Albertus possessed, but competent, capable, able to do the work without constant supervision. This happened over years. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, through repetition and failure and the patient teaching of a man who had learned the work the hard way and was passing it forward to a boy who was learning it the same way. And now, in the present moment, Thomas is approaching the age that Albertus was when Thomas arrived. Thomas is becoming the kind of person who will need to teach others. Thomas is developing the kind of competence that will allow him to understand the work deeply enough to pass it forward. But here's the thing that Albertus has learned. The competence is not the same as the wisdom. The wisdom comes from continuing the work even when it fails. The wisdom comes from being willing to fail repeatedly and to see failure not as an end, but as a beginning. The wisdom comes from acceptance that most of what you do will be wrong, and that this is okay, because wrongness is how you learn what is right. Pause. Thomas does not yet understand this. Thomas still believes that he is learning alchemy, learning how to turn lead into gold, learning how to make the philosopher's stone. What Thomas does not yet understand is that he is learning something deeper. He is learning how to live with obsession. He is learning how to find meaning in repetition. He is learning how to accept failure as a fundamental part of existence. There is a moment, late at night, when Thomas is cleaning the laboratory before going upstairs to sleep. He is wiping down the workbenches. He is putting tools away. He is performing the ritual of closure that marks the end of each day, and he realizes that he loves this work, not in the way that he loves his family or his friends, but in a real way. He loves the way the work feels. He loves the way the laboratory smells. He loves the sense of purpose that comes from doing something that might matter. And in that moment, Thomas becomes truly an apprentice, because he understands that the work is not just something that he is doing, but something that he is becoming. The work is inscribing itself into his very being. The work is changing him in ways that are not reversible. The work is making him into a person who will continue to do this work, probably for the rest of his life. He does not know this consciously. He cannot articulate it if asked. But the understanding is there, written into his muscles and his reflexes, and his sense of what matters and what doesn't. And as he climbs the stairs from the laboratory, as he leaves the work behind for night, he carries this understanding with him like a secret. He is no longer just Thomas the wool merchant's son. He is becoming Thomas the alchemist's apprentice. And he will never be able to become anything else. Pause. Let's talk about what it costs to do this work. Not in money, though there's a cost in money, certainly, but in the body, in the health, in the slow, persistent wearing down of the physical form. Albertus's eyes have been failing for 5 years now. At first, it was subtle. He would find that he needed to move the vessels closer to read the measurements. He would find that the small details that he had been able to see clearly before required more effort to observe. Then one day he realized that half of the letters in a manuscript were simply illegible to him. His vision had degraded significantly, and he had not quite noticed it happening because the degradation had been gradual. This is a problem for an alchemist. Vision is fundamental to the work. Color changes in the liquids are how you know if the process is working. The shade of the flame tells you about the temperature. The clarity or cloudiness of a substance tells you about the purity or corruption. Without good vision, the work becomes guesswork, becomes dependent on Thomas's eyes rather than his own. He has not told anyone about this. Not Catherine, not Thomas, He wears an expression of normality. He continues to work. But each day, the light in the basement seems to dim, or his eyes seem to fail more, and he does not know which. He suspects it might be both. The pain in his hands is worse. His fingers are gnarled now, bent in ways that are not quite natural. The joints are swollen. This is not from aging, though aging plays a role. This is from the work. This is from decades of grinding and stirring, and working with materials that burn the skin slowly, that accumulate in the joints, that change the physical structure of the body. Some mornings, he cannot hold the quill. Some mornings, his hands will not curl properly, and the grinding motion is impossible. On these mornings, Thomas does the work, and Albertus supervises. But Albertus can see the worry in Thomas's eyes. Albertus can see the question forming. What happens when I cannot work? What happens when the time comes that I am no longer capable? Pause. His lungs are problematic. For 23 years, he has been inhaling the vapors that rise from the furnaces. He has been breathing air that is thick with sulfur and mercury and substances that have no name. His chest hurts frequently. He coughs in the mornings. The cough is productive, meaning he coughs up material that is not clean, that contains the substances he has been breathing, that proves that his lungs are retaining what they should be expelling. He has consulted with a physician. The physician is not optimistic. The physician uses words like corrupted air and damaged humors, and life expectancy shortened by years, certainly, perhaps by decades. The physician offers remedies that cannot possibly work: bleeding and the application of particular herbs, and the recommendation that he stop working in the laboratory. The recommendation that he stop working in the laboratory is not an option. This is not something Albertus has chosen. This is something he has discovered about himself. He cannot stop. The work has become so fundamental to who he is that stopping would be equivalent to ceasing to exist. He would rather continue and accept the physical cost than stop and face the existential nothingness that would result. His hearing has begun to fail as well. The hearing loss is bilateral. Both ears are affected equally. This is not from exposure to the laboratory, but it is happening concurrent with all the other failures of the body, and it contributes to the sense that Albertus's physical form is slowly surrendering to the demands that the work has placed upon it. Thomas has to repeat himself frequently now. Instructions that would have been heard clearly before require repetition. Albertus is gradually becoming isolated in a bubble of partial deafness, where he can hear that someone is speaking, but the words are muffled, incomplete, requiring him to read lips and guess context. Pause. There's also the matter of the scars. Albertus's body is covered with them. Some are burns from furnaces. Some are chemical burns from substances that have splashed on his skin. Some are cuts from broken glassware or sharp tools. The oldest scars are pale and have faded nearly to the color of his normal skin. The newer scars are red and angry and obvious to anyone who might see his chest or arms or hands. Catherine used to ask about the scars. She used to look at them with concern, sometimes with something that might have been love. Now she does not ask. She has accepted the scars as part of him, the same way she has accepted the smell and the strange hours and the fact that her husband is no longer really present even when he is physically in the room. The pain in his lower back is chronic. He moves in a way that suggests he is always expecting pain, always bracing against the next spasm. He has become bent slightly, not from age alone, but from years of hunching over work, years of leaning toward furnaces and over workbenches, years of assuming a position that seemed temporary but has become permanent. Yet the work continues. In spite of all of this, in the face of all of this, the work continues because the alternative, the cessation of the work, is unacceptable. The work continues because it has become the only thing that makes Albertus feel alive. The work continues because it is what he is. Pause. This is the hidden cost of mastery. This is what they do not tell you when you are young and enthusiastic and convinced that you will be the one who succeeds where others have failed. They do not tell you that the body is the price. They do not tell you that years of exposure to the materials will age you faster than time itself. They do not tell you that the work will eat you slowly, converting your physical form into fuel for continuing, into the basis of the foundation that your later knowledge will be built upon. But this is the cost, and Albertus pays it willingly. Albertus has decided that he would rather live 20 years in this laboratory, doing this work, than live 60 years outside it, doing nothing that matters. He would rather have his hands gnarled and his eyes failing and his lungs damaged, if those things are price of the work, than have healthy hands and clear eyes and undamaged lungs and the knowledge that he never attempted anything that mattered. This is not wisdom. This is not virtue. This is simply the choice that he has made. And in making this choice, in continuing to make it every day, in reaffirming it despite the physical cost, Albertus becomes something other than human. He becomes something that the work has created, something that the work has shaped and refined like the materials in the furnace. And Thomas, watching this, slowly accumulating his own scars and his own physical degradation, is learning the same lesson. The lesson is that the work requires sacrifice. The lesson is that nothing that matters comes without cost. The lesson is that you will be broken by the work, in small ways and large ways, and you will continue anyway, because the alternative is to be broken in a different way, the way of meaninglessness, the way of a life that passes without having been devoted to anything real. Walking through the streets of Prague, Albertus feels a way that people look at him. The gaze is complex. There is respect mixed with suspicion. There is curiosity mixed with revulsion. Albertus is the man who knows things that other people do not know. Albertus is the man who can read. Albertus is the man who understands processes that seem almost magical. He is, in a sense, the medieval equivalent of the person in an office who knows how to code or how to use a computer or how to understand some technical field that everyone else treats as witchcraft. Except that in the medieval world, the label of witchcraft is taken more literally. Except that in the medieval world, there is actual danger in being someone who knows something that others don't. Pause. The baker looks at him when he passes. The baker is afraid of him. Albertus suspects. The baker knows that Albertus understands chemistry, understands the interaction of substances, understands things about how the world works that the baker does not. And the baker is worried that Albertus might use his knowledge to harm him, or worse, that the baker might be unintentionally harming himself through ignorance of processes that Albertus has mastered. Albertus sometimes thinks about telling the baker that he is fine, that Albertus holds no grudge, that Albertus has no interest in poisoning him or cursing him or doing anything at all except continuing the work in the basement. But Albertus does not say this, because he has learned that reassurance can sometimes be less convincing than silence. Silence allows the baker to maintain a relationship with Albertus that is based on respect and distance, and this is perhaps better than proximity and constant anxiety. There is a merchant class that looks at Albertus with different interest. These are the people like Dmitri, who see in alchemy the possibility of profit. They look at Albertus as a means to an end. They are less afraid of him and more interested in him as a tool. This is in some ways less pleasant than fear because it means that Albertus becomes instrumental, becomes a thing to be used rather than a person to be respected. But it also means that he receives support, that he receives resources, that he receives the kind of material assistance that allows the work to continue. The church looks at Albertus with confusion. Alchemy exists in a strange space in the medieval religious imagination. On one hand, alchemy is clearly forbidden because alchemy is a pursuit of change in the natural world, and change in the natural world is a prerogative of God alone. On the other hand, alchemy is deeply appealing to the church, because the philosopher's stone is understood to be related to the transformation that happens in communion, to the transmutation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. So the church simultaneously forbids alchemy and encourages it, which means that Albertus is simultaneously a heretic and a legitimate scholar. Depending on who in the church you ask, he has been interrogated by inquisitors. Twice. Both times he was released, because the inquisitors could not quite determine if what he was doing was forbidden or if it was simply weird and unprofitable and therefore of limited concern to the church's various interests. The second interrogation lasted for 3 days. The inquisitor kept asking if Albertus believed that he was replacing God's role in creation. Albertus kept saying that he was attempting to understand God's creation more deeply, and that this understanding might allow him to participate in God's creative work. The inquisitor seemed satisfied with this answer, or at least, he seemed to lose interest in pursuing further questioning. Pause. Albertus is not young anymore. He is not ancient, But he is old enough that his place in the social hierarchy has become fixed. He is not going to become rich. He is not going to become powerful in the conventional sense. He is going to remain who he is, a man who works with strange materials in a basement, who pursues a goal that others find incomprehensible, who has traded conventional success for the kind of meaning that only obsessive work can provide. And there is something about this fixed position that brings a kind of peace. He does not have to compete anymore. He does not have to prove himself in the conventional ways that young men prove themselves. He is established. He is known. He is stable in his oddness. The respect that he receives is not the respect that is offered to the wealthy or the powerful. It is the respect that is offered to someone who knows something. In the medieval world, knowledge is power, and knowledge is particularly powerful when it is knowledge that seems almost magical. Albertus knows things about the transformation of materials that no one else understands. This knowledge, even though it has not resulted in the creation of gold, gives him a kind of authority. He has students now beyond Thomas. Young men who have heard that Albertus is willing to teach alchemy, who have come to the laboratory to learn. He teaches them the way he was taught, through grinding and repetition and failure. Some of them quit. Some of them continue. One of them, a boy named Heinrich, seems to have a kind of obsessive temperament that will allow him to continue to work for decades, the way Thomas has and the way Albertus has. This is Albertus's legacy now. Not the Philosopher's Stone, not gold created from lead, but the continuation of the work through other people, the knowledge being passed forward, the obsession being transmitted like a disease from one generation to the next. Pause. Catherine watches this happening. She watches as Albertus teaches these young men. She watches as they become fascinated by the work in a way that she knows Albertus became fascinated by it decades ago. And something in her face softens. She understands, in a way she did not understand when Albertus was still young and perhaps still capable of being something other than an alchemist, that this is who her husband is, not a merchant, not a normal person, not a man who can be changed or fixed or convinced to pursue a more sensible path. This is who he is. And in that acceptance, there is perhaps a kind of love, not romantic love anymore, but a deeper kind of love, the love that comes from living with someone for so long that you understand them completely, even when, or perhaps especially when, understanding them means accepting that they are devoted to something that will never change. Albertus has become a stable element in his community. He is not integrated into society in the conventional way. He does not go to festivals. He does not participate in the political structures. He does not have influence in the business dealings that shape the city. But he is stable. He is known. He is respected in the particular way that people who know strange things are respected. And he has learned to accept this position. He has learned that he does not need more than this. The work itself provides enough meaning. The continuation of the work provides enough purpose. The slow accumulation of knowledge, even knowledge that does not lead to gold, provides enough satisfaction. This is what social stability means when you are someone who has removed yourself from conventional hierarchies. You are stable because you are irrelevant. You are respected because you are mysterious. You are accepted because you are so odd that people have given up trying to understand you or change you. And in that acceptance, Albertus finds a kind of freedom that he could not have imagined when he was young and desperate to prove something to someone. Pause. The sun dips below the horizon. This happens every day, but it is remarkable nonetheless. The light in the basement shifts. The furnaces, which seemed secondary when light was coming to a single small window high on the wall, become the primary source of illumination. Killed by a fighter half his age, his reflexes finally betraying him, time accomplishing what dozens of opponents could not. You watched. You learned. The lesson being, survive long enough and time kills you anyway. So make the most of the time you have. After Cassius came other trainers. Cato, primarily. Stern, technical, brilliant at analyzing opponents and exploiting weaknesses. From him, you learn strategy, the chess game beneath the violence. Fighting is problem solving. He taught you. Your opponent presents problems. You present solutions. The person who solves problems faster wins. Everything else is theater. Diana taught you that theater matters more than Cato admits. If the student didn't understand something, the problem must be with the student, not with Galen. So the student would read more carefully, seek alternative interpretations, try to understand what Galen really meant. This is reverential reading, not critical reading. The assumption is that the text is correct, and your job is to understand a correct interpretation. Medieval universities formalized this. They created commentaries on Galen. Scholars would write interpretations of Galen, trying to clarify his meaning. New commentaries would reference older commentaries. Over time, a massive textual apparatus developed around Galen's original writings. This apparatus served to isolate Galen from challenge. But something real, something that matters. This is a question that Thomas asks once every few months. It is the question that an apprentice asks when they're beginning to understand that they may never achieve the stated goal, and they are beginning to wonder the goal is actually the point. Yes, Albertus says, he is looking at the furnaces now. The flames are beginning to settle into a gentler rhythm as the day's active burning winds down. I think we are creating something. Whether it is what we intended to create is less certain. But I do not think that intention is as important as many people believe it to be. Thomas finishes cleaning. He waits. He knows that Albertus is in a contemplative mood and that there is more to come. I intended to create gold, Albertus continues. I intended to create the Philosopher's Stone. These intentions were clear when I began. They are still clear. But along the way, I have created other things. I have created knowledge about how materials interact with heat. I have created understanding about transformation and change. I have created a framework for understanding the world that is different from the framework that I inherited. And these things, which I did not intend, may matter more than the thing I did intend. Pause. So you do not regret it? Thomas asks, the fact that you have not found gold? Regret is an emotion that requires certainty. Albertus says, regret requires that you know what would have happened if you had chosen differently. I do not know that. I do not know who I would be if I had not devoted myself to this work. Perhaps I would be happier. Perhaps I would be sadder. Perhaps I would have lived longer. Perhaps I would have lived less fully. I have no way of knowing, so I do not regret. I simply acknowledge that the path I chose has led to unexpected destinations. He stands. His back protests. His knees protest. His entire body protests with a voice of pain. But the pain is old enough now that it is like background noise. It is there, but it is not the primary information that his body is reporting. Let us close the furnaces, he says. Let us complete the day properly. This is a ritual that Albertus has developed. Every evening, he walks to each furnace. He checks the state of the flames. He ensures that the fire will burn down safely overnight. He speaks to each furnace, not in words, but in a kind of silent acknowledgement. He acknowledges the furnace for the work it has done. He acknowledges the fire for the transformation it has enabled. He acknowledges the materials for accepting the heat and the change. To an outside observer, this would look like superstition. But Albertus is not superstitious. Albertus is simply being mindful. Albertus is simply paying attention. Albertus is simply acknowledging that the work is real and that the work deserves acknowledgement. Thomas watches this. Thomas has watched the ceremony every evening for 5 years now, and it has become so familiar that it no longer seems strange to him. It is simply what Albertus does. Pause. Albertus leads the way up the stairs. They climb slowly. The first set of stairs is steep. The second set is even steeper. By the time they reach the main floor, both of them are breathing harder than they would like. But they're alive. They are intact. They have completed another day of work without serious injury or catastrophic failure. Catherine has prepared food. There is bread and cheese and some vegetable soup. The kitchen is warm. The smell of the kitchen is completely different from the smell of the laboratory. The kitchen smells like food. The laboratory smells like transformation. These are two different worlds. Albertus eats slowly. He is tired in a way that has nothing to do with how much physical work he has done. He is tired in the way that comes from maintaining intense focus for extended periods. He is tired in the way that comes from existing partially in imagination and partially in reality, never quite being fully in either world. Catherine does not ask about his day. She knows that he will not provide a coherent account of what he has been doing. She has learned that the laboratory has its own language, its own logic, and that translation between that language and the language of the normal world is nearly impossible. After he eats, he goes back downstairs, not to work, just to sit in the laboratory for a while, just to exist in that space with all the tools and all the vessels and all the materials arranged in the careful way that they have been arranged. Pause. He sits on a wooden stool. His back hurts. His knees hurt. His hands hurt. His lungs hurt when he breathes. But he is here, in this space that is created, this space that reflects the obsession that has defined his life. He thinks about gold. He still thinks about gold, though in a different way now. He thinks about gold as an idea rather than as a goal. Gold is perfection. Gold is transformation. Gold is the dream of turning something base into something precious. Whether this is actually possible is almost beside the point now. The point is that the dream is real. The point is that the pursuit has meaning. Tomorrow, he will wake and descend into this laboratory and begin again. He will work with Thomas and the apprentices. He will prepare materials and heat them and observe the results. He will add notes to his journal. He will continue the work. Whether he will ever find gold, he does not know. Whether the process he is following will ever yield a philosopher's stone, he has learned not to expect. But whether he will continue, he is absolutely certain. He will continue because there is nothing else to do. He will continue because continuation is what he is. Pause. I want you to imagine now that you are descending those stairs. I want you to imagine the feeling of moving downward into spaces that are protected from the chaos of the world above. I want you to imagine the smell of the laboratory becoming clearer with each step downward. I want you to imagine the furnaces waiting and the tools arranged on their shelves and the vessels filled with substances in various states of transformation. I want you to imagine that you could live in this space, that you could spend your days doing work that matters only to you, that you could be alone with your obsession, with your dreams, with your certainty that something important is happening, even if no one else in the world believes it. Pause. This is the state we are entering now. This is the state of acceptance. This is a state where you stop fighting against the reality of life and begin to work with it, to shape it, to make it mean something. Your body is feeling heavy now. Your eyelids are heavy. The images that I have been describing, the furnaces, the flames, the colors of transformation, the slow work of grinding and heating and observing, these images are becoming less distinct, less clear, moving away from you like ships drifting out to sea. The sound of the flames is becoming the only sound that matters. The smell of the laboratory is becoming the smell of your own breathing. The temperature of the space is becoming your own temperature. And as Albertus sits in his laboratory on this evening, as he sits with all the pain and all the obsession and all the certainty that his life has been well spent,